Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning. A very warm welcome to the Global Influence Insights for 2026. Thank you for joining us from different regions around the world. It's always a pleasure to have you all in the room, to have senior communications leaders, organization decision makers. It's great to have you all. My name is Lovedin Okafo. I'm the country lead for Newmark in Nigeria, and it is an honor to be moderating this timely discussion. We are indeed at a moment where influence is no longer just about visibility. It's about trust now, it's about relevance, and it's about credibility across increasingly complex and fragmented audiences. So today's conversation is designed to be forward-looking, is designed to be practical, designed to be grounded in real regional experience. So if you are here, you are in the right place, I can tell you. But before we dive in, just a few housekeeping details. You can engage with the speakers. You can drop your questions in the Q&A section at any time. We also encourage you to share your thoughts and engage with us in the chat section to make this an engaging and interactive session that it promises to be. But again, I'll mention that if anything resonates with you, please feel free to use your favorite emojis just to express how the conversation is going on for you. This is the 27th of January, and yeah, it's a new year, it's fresh. So many of us imagine, 2026 is still very distant. We have like several months ahead. But the reality is that strategies for the future are being shaped right now. Audience expectations are evolving faster than most organizational structures. Traditional influence models definitely under pressure. We are seeing shifts driven by a lot of things: digital acceleration, AI-enabled decision-making, you can name them. But you see, this session is not just about reacting to trends. That's not what we're here to do. It's about anticipating some of these things and positioning your organization to be ahead of the curve. So our objective today is clarity. We want to help you understand how influence is changing across regions and how those practical insights translate into practical strategies for your organization. And as you can see, we are here with some senior experts representing EMEA, Asia Pacific, and of course, Africa. So each speaker here will share regional insights, after which we'll connect those lessons into a global perspective. So, we don't just want to talk, but we want to be able to connect the dots so that everybody has clarity and is able to take out key lessons from this webinar. Like I promised, we'll have time for questions. So please feel free at any point, drop your questions, we'll get to them. And I believe my panelists or speakers on this call will be delighted to provide feedback and provide whatever clarity you may seek. I'll take the speaker introductions very quickly, and we can dive into the session. I'll start with Marisa Toro. She's the co-founder and partner at Malo Insights, and she's a PRG and regional vice president for EMEA, Europe, Middle East, and Africa. She brings deep experience guiding organizations through cross-cultural communication and stakeholder engagement. On the call, we also have Sean Yang Xiaofeng, who is the founder and general manager of China Advocate and the PRG and regional vice president for Asia Pacific. He specializes in influence, digital engagement, and evolving B2B communication models across the region. And last but not the least is our very own CEO of the Newmark Group, Gilbert Manirakiza. Gilbert works across multiple markets. helping organizations balance global best practices with local realities. So we'll dive into this exciting conversation. And to start us off, it will be good to hear exactly what is going on in Europe, Middle East, and Africa, seeing that some of these countries really set the pace for shifts in trust, activism, and digital influence. So yeah, that now brings me to you, Marisa. It will be good to hear your insights because you sit at this vantage point from where you see across Europe, Middle East, and Africa. What exactly would you say are the trends that are shaping cross-cultural communication and stakeholder engagement today? Over to you, Marisa.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here and have time to share with you thoughts. And super happy to answer your question after that. Thank you for the organization, and it's an honor that you invite me. As you say, we are in a really incredible time in which things and attitudes are changing around the world, and of course in EMEA. Well, I have to say that from my experience working across EMEA, is one of the clearest shift I see is that communication can no longer driven from a central point and simply adapted to local market. That it doesn't work definitely. The region is so far to drive that the approach and stakeholders immediately recognize when message lack genuine local understanding. No? This is super important. What I see consistently is a strong move toward communication built on trust and context. For example, in Europe, there is a very high expectation of transparency and alignment between purpose, messaging, and action. In the Middle East, for example, my experience see that influence remains closely linked to long-term relationship and personal credibility. This is the most important in Middle East, in my opinion, and across many African. Of course, you know more than me, but what I see is that across many African markets, engagement is stronger when communication connect clearly to real impact and tangible value for communities. This is the most important thing. It could be a very good conversation with you that for sure know more than me, but that's my perception. Another important trend is that stakeholders no longer want to passive recipients of information. They expect engagement, participate, and be here. This is really important. Digital channel plays a key role here, but only when they are used to enable dialogue and listening rather than one-way corporate messaging. That doesn't work. And I also see, that's my final thought, I also see hyper localization become critical, not just language, but in cultural reference, social context, and digital maturity. Organizations that succeed are those that has local expertise rather than impulsive external narratives. Final thoughts on that in this chapter. The key lesson for EMEA is that diversity is not a challenge for communication. It is a great opportunity when managed with cultural intelligence.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Marisa, for those key insights. So it's very clear that it is no longer business as usual. We have to be strategic in our communication. And I like that you basically gave us like a clear picture of the different regions. So for Europe, you said transparency is key. Personal credibility is very important. And for Africa, I can really relate to this one, that there has to be engagement, has to connect to real impact. So people want to see what exactly is the impact of whatever it is you're trying to communicate. And then on the stakeholder side, you're also saying that dialogue and listening are very key. It's no longer a one-way conversation. It's no longer a one-way communication, sorry. There has to be feedback. There has to be an opportunity for dialogue. Thank you so much. I know I'm really very keen on hearing what exactly, how we can position in Africa and also in Asia Pacific. I know Gilbert will bring more insights talking about Africa, but we can go over to the Asia Pacific and see exactly what is going on there. From what I see, influence is also shaped by digital ecosystems. There's just too many things going on. But I would love to hear from Sean. Sean, how can organizations navigate cultural and regulatory differences in Asia Pacific to build influence effectively? What's your take on this one, please?
Okay. Thank you, Lavnin. Hello, everybody. It's lovely to be here to discuss this very inspiring topics with the global audiences. I'm Sean Zhang from China. And I think to answer your question, first of all, I think I need to make it very clear to understand the influence in Asia Pacific. We have to realize that it is not about one single Asian market we're talking about. Asian actually is a combination or a collection of different countries, all with very individual and distinctive cultural norms. That is something when we talk about Asia Pacific, we have to bear in mind. I think if we look at the traditional Western market, influence is often a very straight line from brand to consumers. In APAC, actually, it's more complicated. It's more about a circle of trust. I'm going to give you examples from about different countries. First of all, the China, the country where I am. China is, everybody knows a Chinese term called Guanxi. So the Guanxi ecosystem or the loops in China is very important. So the influence here is not really just about a beautiful advertisement. It is actually about a triple endorsement. You need the government, the policy, the expert to endorse you, to give you the so-called authority. You also need the digital platforms like Douyin, kind of like TikTok or WeChat, to provide your platforms to engage. And on top of that, you are going to need the key opinion leaders or KOCs to help you to reach the community. So we don't really just say a product. Actually, in China, there is a term called 种草, plant grass or seed the grass. Basically, we nurture a desire through peer reviews and media articles until it is time to harvest the sales. So this is about China. And if we look at a more broad regional perspective, for example, about Japan and Korea, these are different. They are more about hyper niche market, which means that very deep loyalty to very specific subcultures. So it's not about general marketing or mass marketing. It's more about very niche and specific marketings. Especially to give you an example about Japan, in 2023, Japan has passed a regulation called Stealth Marketing Regulation, or Shitema in Japanese. So basically, in this regulation, they have a very strict orders and regulations about transparency to work with influencers. So for corporations to work with influencers in Japan, it has to be absolutely transparent and to be very careful. However, if we look to the south part of Asia, for example, like Singapore and Malaysia, it is more about cultural balancing act, because for these regions, there are so many ethics, so many dialects, and so many different people of different background and even colors. Like for example, Singapore is a regional hub for Southeast Asia. It's bilingual, it's both English and Chinese. English for the global efficiency of communications, and Chinese for the local depths. And if you talk about Malaysia, you have to navigate actually a tapestry of different cultures, religions, and sensitivities. For example, Malaysia has many Muslims, and you have to respect like halal certifications. And there are also Indians, so Ramadan or Chinese Lunar New Year. So all these people, they actually coexist together. So in short, communications is not really about the translation of local languages. It's actually to translate your brand values into different people's local festivals and also local social norms. And for India, we all know India is very complicated. In the north, you have the rich upper to middle class, and in the north, you have the poor or even mass market. And the short video is very popular. However, TikTok is banned in India a couple of years ago. So it's something else like Instagram's Reels. And India have so many dialects. So communication is not about one language or two language. It's probably about many local dialects. So just to sum it up, I think in APAC, when we talk about influence, when we talk about trust, it's not about for business to translate their global script into language. Actually, it's more about translating the local culture and blend that local culture into their DNAs so that they actually can get a seat at the table by playing the local rules. Yeah, over back to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sean. I had so much to write. I had so much to take notes on. Thank you. I love the diversity of what you have just, the insights you have just shared. So you see, when people talk about, some people will talk about Africa and say, oh, Africa, like Africa is one country. But I love that you talked about Asia being consisting of several countries that have their diversities, and you have to respect those diversities. So I see a connection between some of the things you have shared and some of the things that Marisa talked about. That local context is important. It's very key, that local understanding, because without that, you're not really going to be able to communicate. So thank you for highlighting that. And you also mentioned something else about transparency, which is also something Marisa talked about. So you see, across board, these are key foundational truths that everyone must have in mind, even as they begin to navigate 2026, have conversations, sit in rooms to talk about what the outlook for 2026 would be for their different organizations. And he said that it's not about translating local dialects. It's really being able to translate brand values, being able to blend the local cultures into the DNA of the organization. So we have to be able to communicate, and influence is strategic. You have to understand how to navigate to be able to truly influence whoever it is you're looking to influence. And it's getting even more exciting. The insights are coming up. I know for Africa, it's really going to be a lot of diversities, but I can trust Gilbert to be able to unpack that. Because I know I see how some of these things are really connecting. And to talk about Africa and see what African organizations should prioritize for 2026 will be our next focus as Gilbert unpacks that. So, Gilbert, please tell us, what exactly is the position for Africa? What do African organizations need to prioritize in 2026 to build influence, to build trust, and to be credible, even as they scale locally and regionally? Over to you, Gilbert.
Thanks, Loveline, and thank you to you, Marisa, and Sean, for those very exciting insights. And I'm very excited because you've really done a bit of my work. You've kind of contextualized what's happening in the region that I'm going to be talking about. But actually, I think what we're talking about applies to a broader category of regions, in the sense that Africa, just like you have mentioned for APAC, is a very diverse region. You have, for example, 5 regions that identify as such officially. So you have Southern Africa, you have Eastern Africa, you have Central Africa, West Africa, you have North Africa, you have the Maghreb region, which is in the middle of West and North, and then you also have the Horn of Africa. And these regions identify as such, they have their own identity. And then you have the 54 countries that have their own identities with their own local contexts and their own expressions of what is important and what is not important. And therefore, in the context of that kind of diversity, you actually have to ask yourself, first of all, what is influence? How should we define influence to begin with? And I believe that influence can only be looked at from a global perspective, from a universal perspective. And the way we at Newmark define influence is that it's really the ability to shape how others think, feel, and act without necessarily relying on authority, incentives, or force. And in the world today, we can see that influence has never been more important than it is today, particularly because we are shifting to what the Prime Minister of Canada called the new world order, a multipolar world, a world where we have, a number of tectonic shifts. That's what I'm calling them, tectonic shifts, in terms of technological revolution, I would say, because when we look at how AI is evolving and how AI is changing how people communicate and interact with knowledge and information and how they consume brands, we can tell that this is something that is quite groundbreaking. Then you look at geopolitically and what's going on in the world in terms of the alignments of markets, the realignments of trade, and global conversation taking place not just between countries but also between regions, as well as within sectors. And it's a very interesting dynamic to watch. But we're also seeing some very interesting shifts when it comes to social, cultural alignments and behaviors. Maybe some of you, maybe Marisa and Sean, you might not have heard about the phenomenon of a young man called IShowSpeed, who is currently finishing up his Africa tour, a 20-something country Africa tour. IShowSpeed is a YouTuber who started. I think he started his YouTube career when he was like 15 or something like that. And last year towards October, he decided to do a tour of Africa. And he had been touring other regions, Asia, India, and Europe. But when he came to Africa, the whole continent came to a standstill. He came to Nairobi, for example, and he had hundreds of thousands of people, not just young people, I mean, different generations, thronging his locations, following his car, watching his streams. I think he got 300,000 new subscribers within the span of a couple of days just from one country. So what does that mean, ladies and gentlemen? This simply means that we are watching a new form of influence. Now, let me give you some interesting numbers. Did you know that globally 97% of customers say that authenticity determines whether they support a brand, and 87% will walk away the moment your actions contradict your words? Now, is that a statistic? No, it's actually a prescription of human nature, and that's why we're so big within my team when it comes to this concept of neuroscience or the psychology of what we do. Now, African audiences are as human as anyone. They are not different. If anything, they are more attuned to the concept of authenticity. And in 2026, my prediction is that African organizations don't have an awareness problem. We actually have an alignment problem. The gap between what we say and what we do is really where trust is either going to thrive or die. So what do we have to prioritize, ladies and gentlemen? I believe that, first of all, community has to be prioritized over broadcast, over just communicating and talking. The other thing is that we actually have to listen to what research is saying. And one of the things that research is telling us is that brands that are building micro communities are actually seeing 25% higher return on investment than those that are just chasing mass reach. And we see this in our work all the time. So what am I trying to say? In Africa, because it's a region that already understands community, this is something that all brands have to take very good care of. They have to pay attention to this. In a place like Kenya, where I am today, we have something called the Chama model, which is like micro communities that come together to do projects together. In other places, you have Stockville, you have the Village Square, you have so many things that point to the importance of community in Africa. Now, these are not just traditions. These are key pillars of what I call the influence infrastructure. So what does that mean? Stop trying to rent attention, but start owning relationships in 2026. The other thing I can say in prioritize as we go forward into the year is that we have to avoid transacting with trust. We have to cultivate it. We have to build it over time. And that is why, in that context, actually, me and my team are working on something very, very exciting. We are working on a book that actually is going to bring together the areas of neuroscience, marketing, digital algorithms, and strategy to really show that there is what we call an influence code. And one of the things we have seen in our research as we are writing this particular piece of collateral, this book, is that trust, there is no shortcut to trust. There is no shortcut to influence. Like I said, this young man that we are seeing and discovering right now, many of us, this young man called Aisho Speed, he has been working on this for years, since he was 15. So that's about 6 years, because now he's about 21. He just turned 21, actually. Secondly, organizations have to start leveraging the trusted voices that they have within their sphere of influence, if I can use that term. So that means that your employees, for instance, are your most under-leveraged influence asset. And unfortunately, we don't see enough brands leveraging this asset in Africa, especially. So we have to go with the trend, or at least respect that trend, that companies that move from just leveraging external influences to internal voices are actually going to benefit significantly in terms of influence. Now, the question is, why is that so? It is simply because when a real employee speaks, it's 40% more trusted than corporate messaging. And in Africa, where personal relationships drive business, like you mentioned, this isn't just a nice to have. It's your competitive advantage. So your brand isn't what your marketing says; it's what your people say when they're not at work, or even when they are at work. And the question is, are they proud to represent you? And if that's the case, that's really your real influence score. Lastly, I would say that you have to start thinking about replacing broadcast with dialogue is a form of interaction and building influence. And we know that quite a number of companies have started understanding this, and they are going towards that direction. And this is good not just for their SEO, but also for their GEO, because we've noticed that generative algorithms actually promote conversations that are authentic online and about a given brand. And this is brought into that AI generative ecosystem. And there is a company that I know shifted from just dumping information to having discussion guides, asking questions like, what does this mean to your work? What does this mean to you as a customer? And they would have this conversation online, and you'll be surprised, or perhaps you wouldn't be surprised, that they actually saw a 10% jump in, the positive sentiment that they were getting online. So this is really a very important trend and shift that we have to look at, not just in Africa, but specifically in Africa, but also across the world. And also, we have to start moving from commanding to convening. We have to keep in mind that influence in 2026 isn't just going to be about who talks the loudest. We've seen that the kind of content that goes viral is not necessarily the content that is loudest, that is the most sophisticated. It's about most of the times the content that commands people's attention, but mostly that attract people's ears. Sometimes it's something very simple. And even earlier today, we were talking about how we get surprised sometimes that some content does particularly well, and it's not the content that we expected to do well. And the one that we invested heavily into didn't do so well. So in a nutshell, I think that we have to focus on community over broadcast. We have to really amplify employee voices as influence assets. And also we have to prioritize dialogue over directives. And African organizations don't need to import trust frameworks. We need to digitize the ones that we've practiced for generations. And this will be a game changer for organizations, not just the ones on the continent, but also those that are coming from the outside into the continent, because we are realizing that multinationals are really struggling because of not heeding to some of these aspects that we are talking about. But the ones that are starting to pick them up, that are starting to adjust their approval mechanisms to accommodate more localization and more authentic voices locally, they are really benefiting from it because they have the global brand and its profile and trust, and they are also leveraging that local voice. Over to you, Loveland.
Thank you, and thank you so much for that, Gilbert. I feel like if we end the webinar here, everyone on this call would have just been able to pack on a whole lot into their suitcases for influence in 2026. But don't worry, we won't stop here. The conversation is ongoing. We're going to even go into a more practical session. Thank you so much for that feedback, Odunayo. Let me see if the emojis work. Can anyone? So it's getting even more interesting. I thank you, Gilbert, for all of those insights you have been able to unpack for Africa. There's just so much you have said that we must hold here as we navigate 2026. So a lot of things are tying in for me in relation to what every other person has said on the call. And we are building, we see that from Europe, Middle East, and Africa, Asia Pacific, Africa, we are hearing a consistent message. Influence is no longer transactional. It's relational, it's contextual, and it's increasingly trust-led. It also has to be very authentic. And like Gilbert mentioned, it's about building communities. It's about building strong communities. So it's like saying, don't even bother saying, okay, you want to concentrate on building your space as a brand. It's important that you invest in building communities. It's also a way of saying, cultivate your own garden, build your own garden, because in no time you'll be reaping from that same garden. And we are at the point where I'm trusting that we can now talk about some practical steps that everyone can take a lot has been said already, but it gets even more interesting. Now we can look at tools, we can look at priorities, we can look at practical adaptation. Basically, all an organization should know or do differently as they proceed to 2026. So we can look at Europe, Middle East, and Africa, Marisa. How can organizations basically anticipate shifts in communication models and stakeholder expectations to stay ahead in 2026? Especially since we understand that there are multiple cultures and markets. What exactly can they do to anticipate some of the shifts? Over to you, Marisa.
Thank you, Lovely. Well, I think that we are in a really interesting year with a lot of change and a lot of motivations to change. But I have to say that anticipating change in EMEA requires organizations uh, to rethink the role of communication entirely, to be honest. The company's best positioning in 2026 is already treating communication as a strategic leadership function, not a reactive one. And this is important. I know that all the communication people always are require this change, but to be honest, I think that this is the year in which companies who want to have good results, companies and institutions and organizations who wants to have good results in terms of positioning, in terms of transparency, in terms of visibility, must to rethink about the role of the communication in the organization. A critical starting point is listening earlier, in my opinion, and more effectively. Many organizations have access to data, but what really make the difference is the ability to interpret early signals, see in a stakeholder expectation, cultural sensibilities, and levels of truth. AI can be a powerful enable here, but only when combined with human judgment and a strong local insight, as we are talking about during this webinar. I also see real value is having clear global framework combined with genuine regional flexibility. It's local context, as we are mentioned during this conversation. The most effectively organization align around purpose, values, and principle. While empowering local teams to adapt messaging to ways that feel credible and relevant. This is important, in my opinion. Another key shift is moving from crisis-driven communication to proactive reputation management. Build trust continuously, identify risk early, and adjust narrative as realities evolve. Real preparation to 2026 is not about reacting faster, this is important, but about building trust consistently long before a crisis emerges. That's my conclusion. Go to you, lovely.
Thank you so much, Marisa. Thank you. Yeah, so it's not a matter of running helter-skelter, it's a matter of taking strategic steps early. You have highlighted a lot of ideas that we must have in mind. You're talking about early communication, listening early, because I mean that's really how you can predict. You can take early decisions even before you find yourself in some conditions which you would have already have planned for earlier than that. So thank you. I like that you also pointed to AI, and we cannot deny that AI has come to stay, but human judgment, like you mentioned, is key. And now that brings us to talk more about some of these emerging digital platforms, which Sean will now be giving us a lot more insights on. For you, Sean, in Asia Pacific, which emerging digital platforms or technologies would you say brands should prioritize to be able to remain influential and competitive in 2026?
Okay. Actually, to answer your questions is actually very different, especially for China. China is different with everybody else because we're in our own world. So I think for example, like in Singapore or Japan, Korea, for example, they all use LinkedIn for business communications to professionals, and they use Instagram, X or Twitter or Facebook or Instagram. I think all these kind of apps in the Western world are valid for Singapore, Malaysia, Japan, Korea, even part of India as well. But as for China, everything we have our own digital platforms, and it's all very different with the one you have seen in the other part of the world. Probably the only common thing is TikTok or Douyin in China. So this is one fact. It's very dividend. But at the same time, we also see that some of the Chinese digital platforms are actually expanding to regions or even in Africa, probably in America. TikTok is one example, and we also see WeChat or Alibaba right now are going outside of China, and some of the payment digital tool as well. For these payment digital tools, it looks like payment tools, but actually it has a lot of social engagement, community engagement functions as well. So we see that actually is penetrating to Middle Asia and Southeast Asia as well. So right now there is a business trend in China calling Chinese Go Global, which I think that is why Marisol and Gilbert, you probably already have some Chinese clients. And for these companies to go global, actually, digital platforms are one of them, actually being encouraged by the Chinese government. So I guess in future, we'll probably see more and more such digital platforms, different versions of overseas. I think since last year, something called Red Note or Red or Little Red Book is the same platform, just in different names, actually being quite popular on the global stage. We have a lot of users from the US to actually register. They call themselves TikTok refugees because TikTok is getting banned, kind of banned in US. They found the Red is a new platform for the young people to talk and to hear. So that is something interesting happening as well. Okay, back to you, Navani.
Yes, thank you, thank you, thank you, Sean. I see the questions are coming in. I also see comments. Please feel free to keep them coming. I promise we will get to them. You can use the Q&A section, or you can drop in the chat box. But it's getting even more interesting. Recently, we can tell that someone has been trending, a TikToker has been trending for the right reasons. So when as Sean was speaking, I could picture some of the digital shifts that are currently ongoing and some of the very interesting things that we are beginning to see on the digital side. So now that takes us back to Africa to see how some of these things can be adapted, considering some of our local realities in Africa. And I'm just wondering, what should African organizations prioritize today? Gilbert, what should they prioritize to adapt global communication to local realities while remaining competitive? Over to you, Gilbert.
Thanks, Loveline. Allow me to actually reframe the question because you see, I believe that there is a lot that the world can learn from Africa. There is a lot that Africa can learn from the world. There is a lot that we can learn and should learn from China, and there is a lot that EMEA can share with Australia. So in the current world, it's very important for communities, individuals, professionals, executives, and brands to listen. I think the critical skill of today is listening, and equipping an organization or a brand to listen is probably the best strategy a leader or a CEO or a C-suite can actually adopt. Because when we look critically at what's happening in Africa, especially in the communication landscape, we actually see that especially looking at data, we see that the world is trying to do things that Africa never actually lost. We see that the West is spending billions trying to manufacture authenticity, for example. But when I look at the type of content and the type of digital culture we have in Africa, what I see is that we actually never actually lost authenticity. And sometimes it's really hard to do anything other than authenticity when you are resource constrained. And many of our creators, many of our influencers didn't start off with big budgets, to buy drones and cameras and set up studios. They just film themselves in their little, 4-bedroom shacks, some of them from informal settlements, others just on the street and in the matatu going somewhere. And you know what? Those are the ones doing very well. So I would say that we actually, or Africa as a region, should actually learn not to abandon the pursuit, not to abandon this authenticity in order to look more global. And therefore, my framework would be as follows. We can borrow systems, but not the soul of the authentic expression of another community. We can also learn from the global best practices because they give us measurement frameworks. We can be able to compare ourselves vis-a-vis what others are doing. But I believe that AI efficiency tools now help us to actually crowdsource some of these things, but still infuse our own authenticity. So I believe that the authenticity found in the diversity of African communities is actually the biggest strength that the region has. But to coming back to your question, there is some of those things like the systems, the processes that have been perfected in different parts of the world that we can learn. In fact, I find that Africa can learn significantly from a bigger diversity of influences. So far, we find that many African countries tend to borrow from Western European, American, British systems because of the historical relationships. But I'm starting to see a bigger diversity of influences. We see, for example, K-pop becoming very big. We see telenovelas becoming very big. So we are seeing huge cultural influences from all over the world. And I think that is a very good trend that brands and creators can keep an eye on because, ultimately it's a very positive thing. The key thing is to make sure that we are not importing, like I said earlier, the soul of those expressions, but we are importing some of the tactical expressions and some of the best ways of doing things that we find elsewhere. Because otherwise, when you borrow, you can lose trust if you are not very careful about how you do it. In terms of the question you asked about tools, allow me to also touch on that very, very quickly. I believe that tools are very critical, and we increasingly are going to need new tools. And the tools that we're going to need might not necessarily be tools that we have to create, but we may have to optimize the ones that we have. I'll give you a very good example. I believe that right now neuroscience should be a very central part of how brands are managed, because it's very clear that right now in a globalized communication landscape, there are no barriers as to which content goes viral. So you actually now have to start looking at human nature. What ticks the brain off? What makes people pay attention? What makes people connect emotionally? What kind of sound connects with people emotionally? What are some of the triggers of what we call the mirror neurons? As you know, I'm very passionate about neuroscience. So I believe that is a very important framework to include into communication strategies. The second one is the integration of that same neuroscience with techniques for producing content. For instance, how do you make a video or a reel capture attention in the first 3 seconds? You need to understand neuroscience to understand what triggers the mind to pay attention. But at the end of the day, you also need the tools to produce this. And this is where AI is coming in beautifully and powerfully, because it gives creators, it gives brands the ability to produce powerful content at scale very quickly. So obviously, AI is going to be a big game changer when it comes to the tools ecosystem. However, that's not enough. For both of these to really be optimal, you have to be listening. So I believe that brands have to invest significantly in social listening tools, digital listening tools, and we obviously know quite a number. They have different applications. There are different ways they are used. I could mention a few, but we don't have the time to go into details. But it's only when you're able to be targeted, like I said earlier, building micro communities is going to be a very big factor of success for brands in Africa. You can't build micro communities if you don't know how to target the members of those communities and figure out those interest points. So it's going to be very important for brands to equip themselves with those tools. Lastly, brands have to start investing in learning ecosystems for their teams and employees, especially at the executive level, because the amount of learning that is going to be needed over the years, especially as AI becomes very fast in how it operates and how it takes over what we do, the amount of learning needed to keep up is going to be quite significant. So it's not going to be about the amount of learning, but about the culture that you set in place to allow for new knowledge to be utilized in real time. Because authenticity is not something you can script for 2 weeks to produce a perfect video. You have to analyze the data in real time and be able to respond in real time with the content, with the messages, with the narratives. I've seen a question about, a crisis that touched Airtel Nigeria. I confess I don't have the specific details about that particular case, but I can already tell you that when it comes to crisis communications right now, those processes that we used to use back in the days of, a 10-stage process, you'd give this statement and that statement, those will no longer work going into the future, because the speed of trust is probably 100 times faster than what we've ever had before. So it means that the tools we need and the skills we need internally for brands, but also generally in terms of how to manage our communication ecosystem, are going to need to also be at scale and real time. So brands can no longer just afford to say, I'll have this standard response. The response should actually having a promise to your stakeholders, to your communities. And that promise needs to be human in scale, but local in expression and application. I can go into details on that, but for now, what I'm saying is every brand should equip itself with a purpose that is universal or human in scale, like I said earlier. But then in terms of how it delivers on that purpose, I'll give you a very simple example to illustrate this. If Elon Musk says that SpaceX should become, that humans should be multiplanetary species. So that means that going to the moon is good for all of humanity. Going to Mars is good for all of humanity. So now that's a human level promise and purpose. Now, how that is broken down in tactical terms is where the rubber meets the road. But the fact that there is that human purpose is a very good starting point. And I believe every single brand, big or small, needs to invest in that asset that we call a human level purpose, and then equip themselves with the ecosystem, the tools and the processes to make it happen in real time and authentically. Back to you, Lovely.
I'm quiet because I feel like I've been struck and I have been empowered for 2026. So you see, you said one of the key things everybody should have in mind, even as they proceed into the year, is the ability to listen. That resonated with me. So, we are gradually coming to the end of this conversation. And I must say, so kind of us to be having this conversation at the beginning of this year. We'll get to the questions, but before we do that, please feel free to drop in the chat box some of the key words that you have heard reoccurring in this conversation, just words, because those are the words we need to remember even as we leave the call. So please go ahead and drop what are the words you've heard reoccurring in all of these conversations. What are the words that have stood out? What are the things you're taking back? That way, I feel like we have been able to pass some lessons or information in this conversation. I haven't seen any word. Is it from my end? What words? For me, authenticity, I've heard it several times on this call. I have heard community, such words. What have we heard so far? What are some of the words that have been recurring as we have been having this conversation? Yes, we'll get to the questions. We'll get to the questions now. There are a number of them. Some of the comments already the speakers have touched on one way or the other. But I would take some of the ones that require for some of the speakers to talk about. So the first one I'll read out is from Ima Okonji. He's asking, he says that the speakers talked about trust and transparency in driving brand visibility. Now he's wondering what happens to organizations when the already built trust starts to dwindle. Gilbert, please, can you take this one? And any of the speakers can.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm sure my colleagues will chime in because we've already talked about some of the elements in terms of trust. But when it comes to trust, I believe that trust starts being eroded when there is a broken promise, when there is an unmet expectation that is not being fulfilled. We usually, as human beings, want to follow those who are able to lead us to a good destination, because as a species, we want to live longer. So there is a longevity objective for human beings, and there is also civilizationally a reproduction element, and so we need to succeed in life. So all of us look forward to brands, look to leaders to take us towards a good destination, to help us become better at what we do, to have good information, to have good knowledge, to have good products. And when there is a betrayal of that desire or expectation from a brand, it becomes very, very difficult to reverse the trend towards distrust. And the only way, or at least the best way, is to start being very authentic, and most importantly, starting to demonstrate and to communicate consistent promise keeping, if I can put it that way. Because the only way to restore trust is to show that one is trustworthy. And unfortunately, many organizations are set up to defend themselves when there is a crisis, when there's a problem. The first thing they want to do is to defend themselves, as opposed to communicating the fact that, you know what, this has happened. It's really unfortunate, and we feel terrible that it has happened. And this is what we are willing to do to fix it. And most importantly, this thing that has happened is not who we are. Because the moment you don't communicate fully and transparently and authentically, people just assume that is who you are. And that is the worst place to be in when it comes to trust. So I would say that authenticity, as we have said earlier, giving a consistent track record of keeping your promise, and most importantly, being clear about your identity and what people should understand it to be. And I believe that there should be an opportunity for any brand doing those things to reverse the trend and even emerge stronger. We've seen this across history many, many times. So having a crisis, a reputation crisis, a trust crisis is not a death sentence, but you will need people like Marisa, Sean, and myself and other colleagues who know how to do these things systematically to actually get you out of that hole. Otherwise, you can't be helped.
Well, lovely. If I have your permission, something that I would like to add to the Gilbert thoughts. That's really interesting. I'm totally agree with him. Is that when organization, companies, or institutions start having problem of trust, sometimes the option is to have a low profile attitude, and I want to remind that low profile in this era, in 2026, is not an option. It's a real problem, because if you don't communicate, other communicate instead of you. So problems with trust is something that companies must work really hard in order to reorganize the trust perception of the community and the stakeholder, because it's it's really important, and no communicate or low profile attitude is not an option now.
Absolutely, Marisa. No more low profile. Now you have to step up. You have to own your space. All right, so we have a few more questions. And Marisa, maybe you can also take this one. Somebody is asking, for organizations scaling internationally, what are the most common communication mistakes that undermine trust and influence?
There is a lot of mistakes, and that's why I saying that one important thing is that understand the communication and the role of the communication people is a real backbone of the must be the real backbone of the organization and the company. I think that in Europe, and centrally in Europe, one of the most important mistakes that companies are put on the place. One of them is low profile, as I mentioned. When companies, organizations have problems, they decide not to do things. Another important area I'm noticed is that the C-level position in organization and companies don't understand in Europe really, really well how important is the digital position, not only the company but also the people who are manage the strategy of the company. And I think, and we are really work hard in Europe, trying that the C-level position people understand that the CEO position programs are super important, because it's part of the business, it's part of the position, it's part of the reputation, and at the end, it's part of the growth of the companies, of the influence of the institution. In my opinion, and talking about Europe, try to work before the crisis and understand how important is the digital reputation. For me, is the challenge at this moment in Europe.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Marisa, for that. And then I'll take us to the next question, and any of the speakers can please take this one. The question is, what role will AI realistically play in communications and reputation management by 2026, beyond experimentation and hype? Role of AI.
I will give this to Gilbert. I'm going to answer the others.
Thanks, Sean. But I know you're a guru on AI, and maybe you can talk about some of the work you're doing on generative engine optimization and also the trends in your country. But generally speaking, when I think about AI and when I look at the trends we are seeing in the communications field, so there are two ways that I believe that it's going to be a bidirectional relationship. Communication is going to affect AI, and AI is going to affect communication. So how is communication going to affect AI? First of all, a massive technology or groundbreaking technology such as AI is the kind of technology that requires trust at a massive scale for it to be adopted responsibly, because you have to realize that you are asking humanity to give up significant aspects of our lives. You're asking us to give our potential jobs or our careers to a platform. That's the first thing, to technology. So for me to be able to accept the trade-off of accepting that a tool takes over what I'm known for, what I do for a living, is going to require a lot of trust, a lot of trust building. It's going to require, for example, convincing me that I need to go back to school to learn this technology. And if communication is not used, if these organizations and countries that are developing these systems do not build the trust needed across the world to have humanity support AI, in my view, humanity is going to turn against AI. We are already seeing countries regulating against AI in different ways. So I believe that it's in the interest of those, big companies, powerful companies that are building AI systems to actually work with the communications landscape and professionals to make AI understood, to make it part of the national, international discourse, to ensure that there is consensus about some of the things the world is concerned about. Communication is equipped to lead on this. And I believe it's very important that we are allowed to assist on this. Now, how is AI itself going to affect communications? Obviously, a lot of us are using AI in different ways to do what we do on a day-to-day basis. However, I see a couple of ways. So the positive and negative influences, if you will. Let me start with the negative so that I end on a good note. So on the negative side, newer generations of communication professionals might actually find it hard to get junior roles because AI platforms are going to be taking on a lot of the grant work, research work, a lot of the information and data crowdsourcing that they were recruited to take up is going to be taken up by even just basic AI systems. Now, leave alone, advanced applications that can do much more sophisticated things. So I see a bit of a negative impact there. But however, that's also a challenge for universities to adapt, to retrain these young people. And also these young people have to, again, have this learning culture whereby they have to constantly keep up and learn how to use these systems now to augment what they know. So one can jump from being a junior skilled employee to being someone with executive level abilities just from learning how to use AI accurately. So there is, I would say it depends on the professional themselves and on the firms and on the countries and hopefully future regulatory authorities to come in and help communication professionals to make that transition safely. So that's one of the ways I see communication affecting the profession itself, particularly younger professionals coming into the field. However, it's all positive from there because communication is a field requires precision, requires crowdsourcing a lot of information in data. So having more efficiency and speed on those particular aspects of what we do, in my view, is something very positive, and I believe we should appreciate it. In Africa specifically, because of the fragmentation, the same thing as in Asia, because of the fragmentation of our markets, we actually need systems that crowdsource sophisticated data sets. The only thing is that we may have, as communicators, to start building our own data sets, because obviously these tools, these AI tools, don't always have credible and accurate sources. So we may have to actually develop this skill set, which is going to be what we now monetize. And that brings me to my very last point. Sorry, Loveline, to be talking for so long, but what I'm saying is we have to now look at communication in the future as not just a service, but a platform. We have to become more, communication has to become, I would say, a business partner to other business departments, as opposed to just being a provider of services and content, because content is going to be easier to produce. Therefore, we can do more, we can provide more sophisticated support to other departments in terms of context analysis, stakeholder analysis, looking at things with the trust lens, with the influence lens that we are equipped to do. And in my view, we just have to become better at analyzing and at building these platforms, because to some extent we may have to become platform builders. And what I'm glad to report here is that PRGN is building, not PRGN as an organization, but agencies within PRGN, quite a number of them are building communication-oriented software platforms that are offering solutions and building things for clients. And I see that's the future. Ourselves at Newmark, we are in the same transition phase of building communication as a platform service, which is going to be much more universal, much more accessible to smaller organizations, because the reality is agencies tend to be for bigger brands that have slightly bigger budgets. But with communication as a platform service, thanks to AI, it can be democratized significantly. So I see that there are potentially more positives than negatives, but it will depend on a lot of factors which are yet to be defined. But generally, I'm optimistic about the whole thing.
Yes, thank you so much, Gilbert. I like the way the questions are tying in, very practical questions. So we will just, we're gradually coming to the end of the session. We have just maybe 2 more questions, and we can round up from there. We have a question around what B2B organizations, how they can adapt their communication approaches as decision makers to become values-driven and digitally informed. What can B2B organizations adapt? How can they adapt their communication approaches to become values-driven and digitally informed? Sean, would you like to give a go at this one?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, sure. Because one of the strengths of China Advocate in PR consulting is that B2B communications. So I think I just do not give you a very thorough and all-round answer. I just give you some observations and a case study from what we have done in the past. I think right now, all organizations are kind of face a challenge of a weak economy and also the pressure of growth, as especially the CEOs or senior executives are facing such a huge pressure. So here in China Advocate, we actually have a so-called methodology approach called 5R in 1. So what are the 5R? 5R means PR, GR, CSR, expert relations, ER, and the last one, CR, customer relations. So if the communications can be strategically designed to provide a platform and content to engage all of your stakeholders in one goal, that actually will save your time and energy and investment, and at the same time achieve multiple results on different forefront. So that is our approach, and we think that for communications, it is indeed about corporate reputations, your brand, but it is also about your business growth. And if we can find something to do like that, that will help the business a lot. So I will just give you one example about what we have done for LinkedIn in China. So LinkedIn is actually banned in China. So they don't really have a corporate news. They don't have new investment. They don't have product launches. And their business in China is trying to find these Chinese companies going global to place recruitment advertisement or marketing advertisement in LinkedIn Europe, LinkedIn Middle East, or LinkedIn Spain. So this is their business model in China. So for communications without news, how do you do that? Especially it's American-based .com internet companies which have a data issue. So our approach is threefold. Number one, we need to find in LinkedIn a credible business partner which has a really much bigger name and reputation in China, and it's better to be a Chinese name that could provide the political correctness or political safety endorsement to LinkedIn. For example, we helped LinkedIn to bridge with People's Daily, that is national party media, or with Xinhua News Agency. So find an organization who can endorse LinkedIn being a foreign company. This is for the reputation protection. Number two, this organization, if possible, they also have a huge database full of Chinese companies going global. For example, in China, CCPIT is a leading national organization, covers all the Chinese companies going global. So if we have a white paper launch event for CCPIT with LinkedIn, actually LinkedIn sales and marketing could have access to CCPIT member company database for direct marketing. So by doing this, we actually provide them access to their potential customers. Number three, so when we are doing such an event for LinkedIn with CCPIT, the Chinese Government Industry Association, we actually also broadcast like an online webinar on trade media. For example, there are 3 trade media for us to be a partner for that event. And to be the partner of that event, of course, we pay the media partner a small money for them to distribute that event information and collect the sales needs for LinkedIn. So for example, for one event, we actually collected more than 1,000 potential leads and only at the cost of, I think, $20,000. So I think both the client, the client feel very happy. It's not only about reputation, it's also about political endorsement, and it's also about the business growth. So I think in that way, actually, the communication people stay much closer to the business and also to the senior executives. Back to you,
Thank you,
Melanie.
thank you. Thank you so much, Sean. Our time is fast spent, but we can quickly take the remaining 2 questions. One of them is somebody's asking, what skills and capabilities should communication teams develop now to stay relevant through 2026 and beyond? I know Gilbert already touched on this one a bit, but Marisa, maybe you can just add a few more insights to this.
Sure,
Thank
Loki.
you.
Well, I think that the Gilbert mentioned about that and was really interesting. For me, working in the area of AI and understanding how important is the digital communication, to be honest, I'm really have the credibility that now the best skill for the communication team must be the possibility to make really strong human connection. I mean, at that moment, the artificial intelligence help us to produce content and something like that. At that moment, we have the possibility to connect globally through the digital ecosystem. But any of those areas, AI and digital, can change how important is the human connection, how important is the possibilities of influence when you have really good contact with journalists, with institutions. And for me, this is the way to move things and the possibilities that things happen. And at that moment, I'm really supporter that the most important skill for the communication team, for communication and public affairs, is to have the ability to create a strong relation with people.
Thank you so much for that, Marisa. And lastly, how can organizations balance global brand consistency with a need for strong local relevance in diverse markets? I'll be happy for any of the speakers to please take this one. How can organizations balance global brand consistency with a need for strong local relevance in diverse markets?
John.
I'm happy to answer this one. Yeah, I think back to one of the previous questions about the common mistakes for global organizations. I think one of the common mistakes really is about their kind of like the global standard to override local realities, or this kind of one size fits all strategy or approach. I think that's one of the common mistakes. And I think in today's world, we all know it's very fragmented, it's very divided. The trust link is not very strong. There's so much information overloaded, and people have very little or no patience for the communications we received. I think all of this actually give opportunities for the local, more actually means that local relevance or local execution be more critical than ever. I think for multinational companies or global organizations, they could have the global or regional hub to provide all of the content, but the local adoption and local execution is really key. So the compilation of global and local is very important for them to succeed. I think no matter in China or in Africa, probably in Spain as well. That means actually a company right now has to be a local insider before they can be a global leader in any individual market, because right now we're in a fragmented world. That is my observations. I think PR agencies, PR agencies in different countries are actually your partner actually can help the global organizations to achieve that goal. Back to you, Navni.
Thank you so much, Sean. We have now come almost to the end of the conversation, the session. But as we round off, I'll just be happy to hear the speakers take turns to tell us just in one word what describes or captures the best positioning for influence in 2026. Just a word for us to take back.
I will say trust. For me, is the key word of most important in terms of position, reputation, and influence.
Absolutely. Thank you, Marisa.
I would say local and long-term.
I'll go with the word relationships. I think that's the one. Yeah, that's the one I'll go with. We have to learn to build relationships, and that connects to the previous question of what should people learn. They should focus on learning how to create connections and relationships.
Thank you so much to my amazing panelists, the speakers, for your exciting insights, your openness. Thank you for being present. And thank you to our very audience for your thoughtful engagement. It was a very engaging session, you can tell. This conversation truly doesn't end here because, left for me, I'm enjoying myself right now. So I'll rather just keep listening to the amazing speakers, chart the path for 2026. But we encourage you to continue reflecting. Please continue the conversation. We at Newmark are very happy to even take the conversation forward. We are happy for you to engage with any of the speakers. Just continue the conversation about how influence is evolving within your organizations and regions. As we conclude today, we are pleased to announce that this webinar will be published on the Newmark YouTube channel. So don't worry, I will go back to it myself. So please feel free to visit to learn more and to keep the insights, some of these insights in mind as you navigate 2026. And as you know, Newmark, you can find us across our social media platforms on Facebook at Newmark Group Limited, on X, Newmark World, leading the Newmark Group. Thank you very much. On this note, I thank you again for joining the Global Influence Insights for 2026. We look forward to continuing this on some of our other webinars in the year. And this is Loveline Okafor. Thank you and have a good day. Bye.